I don't know what's more impressive, Jack Johnson's boxing skills or his ability to marry white women.
Who knew a man so brash would keep such secrets?
As the first African-American world heavyweight champion, his rise in the early 1900s defied the deeply entrenched racism of his time. Unapologetically confident, Johnson's bold lifestyle and unparalleled skill made him a symbol of resilience and defiance. And I'm going to make T his GLS, or is his Q now. However, behind his monumental achievements lies a life marked by
and I'm gonna make you fall. It's tough. Is his God, or is his Q? And now.
incredible tragedy and injustice. Stories so shocking they're almost hard to believe. We'll uncover the darker chapters of Jack Johnson's life, from relentless racial persecution and legal battles to heartbreak and a tragic end that underscores the discrimination he fought his entire life. These tragic details not only reveal the cost of his courage but also serve as a window into the systemic inequalities of his era. By exploring his story, we aim to understand the triumph, struggles, and lasting legacy of one of history's most extraordinary figures. Jack Johnson's story begins on March 31, 1878 in Galveston, Texas, where he was born Arthur John Johnson, the son of Henry and Tiny Johnson, former slaves. Jack was the third of 9 children in a household that, despite its humble circumstances, was filled with love and resilience. His father worked as a janitor and dock laborer, while his mother supported the family as a domestic servant. Raised in a racially segregated society, Johnson faced the harsh realities of systemic racism from an early age. A bustling port city, was a melting pot of cultures but also a place where racial tensions were ever present. Johnson would later reflect on his childhood, saying, "I grew up in a land where lynching was an everyday affair, and I knew from the start I had to fight for my place in the world." Despite the racial challenges that surrounded him, Johnson's parents instilled a sense of pride and resilience in their children. His mother in particular was a strong influence, often telling him, "Never let anyone tell you that you're less than they are. You are just as good as anyone else." These words would echo throughout Johnson's life as he fought not only in the ring but also against the societal barriers placed before him. While Johnson received a basic education in local schools, his formal schooling was frequently interrupted by the need to work and help support his family. From a young age, he took on various odd jobs, including working as a dock laborer, stable hand, and janitor. These physically demanding jobs not only provided financial support but also helped him build the strength and endurance that would later become hallmarks of his boxing career. Johnson's physical presence, strong, confident, and unyielding, was a reflection of the early struggles he endured. Johnson's first exposure to boxing came during his teenage years. Boxing at the time was a rough and unregulated sport, often taking place in the back alleys and saloons of cities like Galveston. These early matches were informal and brutal, with fighters competing for small prizes and bragging rights. Johnson's natural athleticism and determination quickly made him a standout. He later recalled these early days, saying, "I learned how to fight by watching others and by taking a lot of punch, but I never backed down. I always got back up." It was during this time that Johnson encountered Frank Childs, a prominent local boxer who would become one of his earliest mentors. Childs recognized Johnson's raw talent and began training him, teaching him the fundamentals of boxing and emphasizing the importance of strategy and technique. Under Childs' guidance, Johnson began to understand that boxing wasn't just about brute strength, it was a science. "Frank Childs taught me the science of boxing," Johnson later said. "He showed me that it was about skill, timing, and intelligence." The lessons Johnson learned from Childs would become the foundation of his career. In addition to developing his skills in the ring, Johnson also developed a reputation for his cleverness and ability to outthink his opponents. Even in these early days, he demonstrated the qualities that would later define him as a fighter: quick reflexes, exceptional defensive skills, and a keen ability to read his opponent's moves. Though Johnson was honing his craft and gaining confidence in his abilities, his path was anything but easy. The racial climate of the late 19th century meant that opportunities for a young black fighter were limited, and he often had to contend with prejudice and discrimination both in and out of the ring. Despite these obstacles, Johnson remained undeterred, determined to make a name for himself in the sport he loved. By the late 1890s, Johnson's reputation as a skilled and fearless fighter had begun to grow. His first recorded professional fight took place on November 1, 1898 in Galveston. When he was just 20 years old, he defeated Charlie Brooks, earning a small purse and marking the beginning of what would become a groundbreaking career. This victory was not just a personal achievement but a symbolic one, as it signaled the start of his journey to challenge the deeply ingrained racial barriers in the world of boxing. Johnson's early life and challenges laid the foundation for his later success and resilience. The lessons he learned during his childhood and early career about strength, perseverance, and self-worth would become central to his identity as both a fighter and a man. Through hard work, determination, and an unwavering belief in his own abilities, Johnson began a journey that would not only change his life but also leave an indelible mark on the history of sports and civil rights. Jack Johnson's rise to fame was not Just a personal triumph, it was a groundbreaking journey that redefined the possibilities for African Americans in sports and beyond. His professional boxing career began in 1898 with his debut match against Charlie Brooks in Galveston, Texas. The victory, though modest in prize money and recognition, marked the start of a career that would eventually place Johnson at the center of both the boxing world and the fight for racial equality. In 1902, Johnson achieved his first significant milestone when he defeated Frank Childs in Los Angeles to claim the colored heavyweight championship. At the time, racial segregation in boxing mirrored the societal divisions of the era. Black fighters were systematically excluded from competing for the more prestigious heavyweight title held by white champions. Separate titles like the colored heavyweight championship were created to allow black boxers to compete, but they came with far less recognition and opportunity. For Johnson, this victory was both an acknowledgement of his growing dominance in the ring and a stepping stone toward his ultimate goal to break the racial barriers that kept him from competing at the highest levels of the sport. Despite his success, Johnson faced immense resistance from white promoters and fighters who refused to give him a chance to compete for the world heavyweight title. Undeterred, he continued to fight and win, building a reputation as a skillful and strategic boxer. Johnson's ability to outthink and outmaneuver his opponents became his trademark, and his unyielding determination eventually forced the boxing establishment to take notice. Johnson's opportunity to fight for the world heavyweight title finally came in 1908. After years of being denied the chance, he secured a match against Tommy Burns, the reigning champion. Johnson clenches with Tommy and smiles during Siders. The fight took place on December 26, 1908 in Sydney, Australia, and it was a historic moment in both sports and society. Leading up to the match, Burns, like many white champions before him, had been reluctant to face a black challenger. It was only the promise of an unprecedented $30,000 purse that persuaded Burns to accept the fight. In the ring, Johnson's dominance was undeniable from the opening bell. He outclassed Burns, using his superior skill, strength and strategy to control the fight. Johnson's confidence and playful taunting further frustrated Burns, who was unable to mount any effective offense. The fight was so one-sided that police intervened in the 14th round to stop it, declaring Johnson the winner. With this victory, Johnson became the first African-American world heavyweight champion, a title that symbolized not only his personal triumph but also a challenge to the racial hierarchy of the time. Johnson's historic victory over Burns was met with a mix of awe, outrage and fear. For African Americans, it was a moment of immense pride and inspiration, a tangible proof that barriers could be broken. For many white Americans, however, Johnson's ascent was seen as a direct threat to the racial order. The backlash was swift and severe as the search began for a great white hope who could defeat Johnson and reclaim the title for the white community. The most high-profile of these challenges came in 1910 when former heavyweight champion James J. Jeffrey came out of retirement to face Johnson, dubbed the fight of the century. The match was held on July 4, 1910 in Reno, Nevada, and it carried enormous social and racial implications. Jeff, who had never fought a black opponent during his career, was touted as the man who would restore racial pride and supremacy. Jeff, at 226 PBS, is fighting at the same weight at which he last defended the heavyweight championship in 1904 against Jack Monroe. The fight drew a massive audience both in person and through telegraphed updates across the nation. From the outset, however, it was clear that Johnson was the superior fighter. He outclassed Jeff in every aspect, controlling the pace of the fight and landing precise, powerful blows. As the rounds progressed, Johnson's dominance became more apparent, and by the 15th round, Jeffrey was knocked down twice before his corner threw in the towel. Johnson's victory over Jeff was a monumental achievement that symbolized resilience and racial pride for African Americans. It was a rare and powerful moment of vindication in a society that consistently sought to marginalize and oppress them. However, the social backlash was immediate and violent. Across the United States, race riots erupted, fueled by white anger and frustration over Johnson's triumph. These riots, which resulted in numerous deaths and injuries, underscored the deep racial divisions of the time and the resistance to Johnson's success. Despite the backlash, Johnson's reign as heavyweight champion from 1908 to 1915 was a period of unparalleled dominance. He defended his title multiple times against formidable opponents, using his exceptional defensive skills, quick reflexes, and strategic mind to remain at the top. His style of boxing, characterized by his ability to slip punches and counter with precision, set him apart from his contemporaries. Yet Johnson's success was constantly overshadowed by the racial discrimination he faced. Many white champions continued to refuse to fight him, and his victories were often met with derision rather than celebration in the mainstream press. Johnson himself was unapologetic about his achievements and his right to live as he chose, famously saying, "I am free to be what I want to be." By 1915, Johnson's reign came to an end when he lost to Jess Willard in Havana, Cuba, under controversial circumstances. The fight, which lasted 26 grueling rounds, ended with Johnson being knocked out. Many speculated that the defeat was intentional, orchestrated as part of a deal to allow Johnson to return to the United States without facing further legal trouble. troubles. Regardless of the truth, the loss marked the end of an era but not the end of Johnson's influence. Jack Johnson's rise to fame and his time as heavyweight champion were marked by both triumph and adversity. His victories in the ring challenged the entrenched racial prejudices of his time, forcing the world to acknowledge the skill and resilience of black athletes. However, his success also made him a target of societal backlash, highlighting the deep-seated racism that defined early 20th century America. Through it all, Johnson remained a symbol of courage and determination, paving the way for future generations to break barriers and claim their rightful place in the world of sports and beyond. Jack Johnson's personal life was as bold and defiant as his career in the boxing ring, often making headlines and sparking outrage in a deeply segregated society. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of his life was his high-profile relationships with white women, which were seen as a direct affront to the racial norms of the early 20th century. During a time when interracial relationships were not only taboo but also illegal in many states, Johnson openly courted and married white women, unapologetically defying societal expectations. His relationships became a focal point for public scrutiny and condemnation. One of his most infamous relationships was with Lucille Cameron, a white woman he met in Chicago. Their romance drew the eye of authorities, who were eager to find any means to discredit and punish Johnson. In 1912, he was arrested under the Mann Act, which made it illegal to transport women across state lines for immoral purposes. While the law was ostensibly designed to combat human trafficking, it was often used selectively to target individuals like Johnson whose actions challenged social norms. The charges against Johnson were widely seen as racially motivated, a means of punishing him for his defiance of racial boundaries. Despite a lack of concrete evidence, Johnson was convicted in 1913 and sentenced to a year and a day in prison. This conviction underscored the systemic racism of the American legal system, where laws were manipulated to enforce social hierarchies. Johnson himself reflected on the case, saying, "They wanted to destroy me because I was living my life the way I wanted rather than serve." His sentence immediately, Johnson fled the United States, choosing to live in exile for several years. During this time he traveled across Europe and South America, continuing to fight and maintaining a lavish lifestyle. However, his time abroad was fraught with challenges. While he managed to stay active in boxing, the shadow of his legal troubles in the U.S. loomed large, and his financial resources began to dwindle. Living in exile also took an emotional toll on Johnson. Cut off from his homeland and constantly hounded by the press, he became increasingly isolated. Yet even in the face of these struggles, Johnson remained defiant, refusing to let the racism and prejudice that plagued his life dictate his choices. In 1920, after years of exile, Johnson made the decision to return to the United States and face the consequences of his conviction. He surrendered to authorities and served his sentence at the United States Penitentiary in Lenworth, Kansas. During his time in prison, Johnson remained active, giving boxing lessons to fellow inmates and maintaining his physical fitness. Reflecting on his imprisonment, he said, "They could lock me up, but they couldn't break my spirit. I was always a fighter inside and outside the ring." After his release, Johnson faced a host of new challenges. His time in prison and years in exile had taken a toll on his career, and the public's interest in him had waned. Financial difficulties plagued him, and he struggled to find opportunities to regain his former status. He worked various jobs, including performing in vaudeville shows and making appearances as a sideshow attraction, but these efforts fell far short of the acclaim and success he had once enjoyed. Despite these hardships, Johnson remained a prominent figure in the boxing world, often mentoring younger fighters and sharing his knowledge of the sport. His unwavering resilience and determination in the face of adversity continued to inspire those around him. Jack Johnson's personal life and the societal backlash he faced were a microcosm of the racial tensions that defined early 20th century America. His relationships, legal troubles, and eventual imprisonment were all shaped by the systemic racism of his time, which sought to punish him for daring to defy societal norms. Yet even in the face of relentless persecution, Johnson refused to compromise his identity or his principles. His life serves as a testament to the courage and strength it takes to stand up to injustice even when the odds are overwhelmingly against you. Jack Johnson's legacy extends far beyond his dominance in the boxing ring. As the first African-American world heavyweight champion, he opened doors for generations of black athletes, proving that skill, determination, and courage could transcend the barriers of racism even in the face of relentless societal opposition. Johnson's influence on boxing and civil rights is undeniable, and his life exemplifies both the power of perseverance and the heavy costs of defiance in a racially segregated society. Johnson's impact on boxing can be seen in the career of legends like Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali. Joe Louis, who had become the second African-American heavyweight champion decades after Johnson, credited Johnson as a trailblazer who paved the way for his success. Muhammad Ali, known for his bold personality and activism, often spoke of how Johnson inspired him to stand Firm against prejudice and fight for justice. Jack Johnson showed me that you don't have to conform to what society expects of you, Ali once said. By refusing to back down in the face of systemic racism, Johnson not only elevated boxing as a sport but also challenged the social norms of his time, forcing the world to confront the racial inequalities embedded in every aspect of American life. While Johnson's achievements brought him fame and adulation from some, they also made him a target for those who saw his success as a threat to the racial order. His unapologetic lifestyle, particularly his relationships with white women, defied societal norms and sparked outrage among white Americans who viewed his confidence as a direct challenge to their authority. Through it all, Johnson demonstrated unwavering courage, using his fame as a platform to confront racial injustices even at great personal cost. Tragically, Johnson's life came to a sudden and symbolic end on June 10, 1946, while driving near Raleigh, North Carolina. He was involved in a fatal car crash. According to reports, Johnson had been driving angrily away from a diner that had refused to serve him because of his race. This incident was a poignant reminder of the systemic discrimination that had shaped his entire life. Even in death, Johnson's story highlighted the pervasive racism of the era, a constant battle that he had faced head-on throughout his career and personal life. Despite the challenges and controversies that marked his life, Jack Johnson's contributions to sports and society have been increasingly recognized. In the years since his passing in 1990, he was posthumously inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, solidifying his place as one of the greatest fighters in history. This recognition cited not only his unparalleled skill in the ring but also his role as a pioneer who broke down racial barriers. In 2018, more than 7 decades after his death, Johnson received a long overdue presidential pardon for his 1913 conviction under the Mann Act. The pardon was a symbolic gesture acknowledging the racial injustice he had endured and the courage he displayed in standing up to an oppressive system. It was a moment of historical reckoning, underscoring the enduring significance of Johnson's legacy in the fight for civil rights. As we reflect on Jack Johnson's life, it becomes clear that he was a man of unparalleled skill and defiance in a time when society sought to confine African Americans to positions of inferiority. Johnson broke barriers with his fists, his intellect, and his unapologetic confidence. His life was a testament to resilience, a refusal to conform to the expectations of a deeply racist society, and an unwavering belief in his own worth. Johnson's story is both tragic and inspiring. While he achieved incredible success and left an indelible mark on sports, his life was marred by relentless discrimination, legal persecution, and personal struggles. Yet his legacy endures not just as a boxing champion but as a symbol of resistance and empowerment. Today, Johnson's influence can be seen in the generations of athletes and activists who have followed in his footsteps, using their platforms to speak out against injustice and demand equality. His life serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of fighting for justice even in the face of overwhelming odds. Jack Johnson's tragic yet inspiring journey continues to resonate, reminding us that true greatness is not just about what you achieve but about the barriers you break along the way. Through his courage, resilience, and unyielding spirit, Johnson left a legacy that inspires us to strive for a more just and equitable world. His story is one of triumph and tragedy, but above all it is a story of a man who refused to be defined by the limits society tried to impose on him, paving the way for future generations to dream bigger and fight harder.